Welcome to Gold and Blue, everybody, home of the college football fan. And don't forget about the checklist. Hat check, sunglasses check, Pepsi check, notes check, sources check, and thick skin is a check. And don't forget to sing gear to represent your team and yourself in my background. Send it to P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina, 29657, and get yourself a shout out. On to the next video. In case you're wondering, these are the teams that we don't have represented for the mini helmets. As you can see, we actually have quite a few big brands that's not represented here at Gold and Blue. So get your team represented here on Gold and Blue. Hey, you already know what time it is, so might as well sit down, brace yourself, and buckle up because you are entering the speculation zone. So we went from ESPN being in on a TV deal and having a decent offer to the Pac-12 to ESPN pulling that because of some Disney problems, re-offering the Pac-12, low-balling the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 actually turning that down. ESPN and the Pac-12 being nowhere close to being in the same ballpark when it comes to a media rights deal. So now ESPN possibly bribing teams to jump from the Pac-12 elsewhere. This is absolutely crazy. By the way, this will be a Get It Gang video idea. If you don't know what the Get It Gang is, it's basically a name that I came up with for a group of people that leave video ideas in the comments of my videos. So if you think that you have a good video idea, leave it in the comment section of my videos, and I just might use it on my next video. First up, this was from the Monty Show from yesterday. The headline was The Monty Show 920. ESPN is out on Pac-12 TV deal. ESPN sources were saying, we are nowhere close to a deal. Then, of course, our favorite college football conspiracy theorist MacGyver had this to say. BY has met with presidents from Colorado and Arizona in recent days. We'll be meeting with ASU presidents soon. Tide may be turning. Presidents are getting antsy despite public talking points. 45 seconds to Pac midnight. Hashtag Pac-12 doomsday clock. Once again, another headline from The Monty Show. YouTube, The Monty Show. The Pac-12 and ESPN are not in a good place. Is the Pac-12 going 100% streaming? Then from The Swaim Show from yesterday said, breaking news, ESPN only paying $9 million per Pac-12 team, but now they're going to offer multiple Pac-12 schools the same money they'll pay each to make a Big 12 move. If more than 4, I'm not a fan. On to the Get It Gang video idea comments. The first two are from Rick Sock. First one says, with a thinking emoji. Colorado paid $6.86 million to leave the Big 12 those years ago. If they come back to the Big 12, which I don't think the Big 12 should bring them back because they did leave, do their donors and taxpayers feel like it was a good investment? That's a good point right there. His second comment was, GBD, not just recruiting being affected by the idea of streaming games and lack of being seen. With all the unknown, how has the transfer portal been impacted by Pac-12 players? How many players from the Pac schools, especially those not in the rumors of jumping ship, have entered the transfer portal this season compared to previous seasons? Yes, I do think that this streaming deal will impact the transfer portal when it comes to Pac-12 as well. Next Get It Gang video idea comment comes from Kevin. Video idea. Oregon and Washington are secretly rooting for the Pac-12 to fail and dissolve. In this scenario, they would have a landing spot in the Big Ten. Oregon and Washington would hope for the Pac-12 to dissolve to avoid paying any buyouts or other fees. The longer it takes the Pac-12 to negotiate a deal, the better it is for Oregon and Washington. There is no way the Pac-12 gets a deal that is $40 million plus. Oregon and Washington would make more than the Pac on a reduced revenue share in the Big Ten. And I have talked about that many, many times. And honestly, that's why they're hoping that the Big Ten adds them sooner rather than later. Because when this particular TV deal is up, there is no buyout at all. Will the Pac-12 be able to get these teams to sign a grant of rights? That is a big time question. I think if this grant of rights goes past 3 years, they don't get any of these teams to sign that grant of rights. The next Get It Gang video is from Kurt Myers. Gold and Blue, today's Monty Show is a result of a comment yesterday about ESPN trying to persuade Washington and Oregon to join the Big 12. Not the Big 10, the Big 12. I pointed out that ESPN appears to be playing an adversarial role when it comes with the PAC. I would agree with that. You know, it would make sense that they're trying to persuade Oregon and Washington to join the Big 12 because they do have a deal with the Big 12, not the Big 10. And the biggest argument that people have given me as far as why ESPN needs the Pac-12 is because the Pac-12 After Dark content. And what I've said is they don't need the Pac-12 After Dark. They just need something After Dark. If they were able to persuade Oregon and Washington to go to the Big 12, they would have great brands for that, I guess, Big 12 After Dark slot. The next Get It Gang video idea comment comes from Bonehead. He starts off by giving a quote. Nobody out there is wanting to do a deal. President Robert Robbins, Arizona Wildcats. Quote from Dennis Dodd article, how pathetic is that? So Robert Robbins, the Arizona president, is saying nobody is wanting to do a deal. Now we're hearing that ESPN might be backing out. Could he be talking about Apple TV and Amazon Prime Video as well? That would be the worst of the worst. That means the Pac-12 wouldn't have a deal with anybody. Finally, the last one is actually from the Swaim Show. Here's what he tweeted today. Once again, money is a huge issue with the Pac-12. But the bigger issue is that no one will see you if you're not on ESPN and or Fox. This was a big issue with the Pac-12 network, and it looks to be getting even worse. Yes, the Pac-12 network was a big issue when it comes to making money and producing revenue because of exposure. Nobody had access to the Pac-12 network, or very few people had access to the Pac-12 network. That was actually the same issue with the ACC network as well. So is it possible that ESPN is actually trying to, bribe teams to jump from the Pac-12 to the Big 12? If so, I'm sure they're trying to keep it as hush-hush as possible because that could actually turn into a lawsuit if they're actually trying to do that. What we do know is that ESPN did try to lowball the Pac-12, offering them $90 million a year, which would be $90 million per team per year at 10 teams. So if they actually add on more teams, that would be divided into more slices, meaning less revenue per team. But on top of that was the exposure. And that's the biggest problem that I think the Pac-12 has with this. Because as is, that means that they would only have one game a week that would be on linear cable. That would be in the Pac-12 After Dark slot on ESPN. So even the one game a week would be at the time that most people don't watch college football or TV in general. That late night slot on ESPN for the Pac-12 After Dark. So not only would it be mostly streaming and you would only be getting one game a week on cable, but that one game a week on cable would be that late night slot. So that in and of itself is not good for the Pac-12. So the Monty Show and CBS actually talking about ESPN possibly not even wanting to do a deal with the Pac-12 right now because they're so far away. That would be even worse. That would mean that it would be 100% streaming, and these teams recruiting would suffer tremendously. And I think the economics of the teams that are in smaller cities and smaller markets would suffer tremendously in the months of August through November. I don't think Washington would hurt that much because they're in Seattle. Same with Arizona State because they're in Phoenix. Utah to some extent because they're in Salt Lake City. But these other schools, their economics from August to November will suffer greatly if this is streaming heavy or streaming exclusively. That's not good at all. On top of that, ESPN offering that same amount to these teams if they jump from the Pac-12 to the Big 12. If that's true, that tells me that ESPN truly wants that After Dark slot to be in the Big 12, and that if they can help it, they don't want to spend any money on the Pac-12 as long as those brands go to the Big 12. That way they would have content for the Big 12 After Dark and not the Pac-12 After Dark because they would have more choices. Anyway you slice this is a bad situation for the Pac-12. It seems like every day that passes by, it's more and more bad news from the Pac-12. And I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. Every day that passes that there's no news out of the Pac-12 is a sign that there's actually bad news coming out of the Pac-12. I've quoted this several times, but I want to quote it again. This was from the Swaim Show from the other day. Recruiting already taking hits in Pac-12 as questionnaires we annually send to rising seniors coming back with more comments than normal. And players definitely concerned with Pac-12 not being on television so that their family and friends can watch. This is a very big deal. The Pac-12 has a TV deal, but not only are they embarrassed to release it, as few will see it on Amazon, ESPN, one linear game. And it's only 50 to 60% of the money the Big 12 teams are getting. Good luck getting teams to sign grant of rights with that, especially the Ducks and UW. Smiling face emoji. Not really the Pac-12's fault, but of the many problems they're now going through, possibly the worst of the worst is that the TV folks are going through bankruptcies and downsizing. Not much they can do about that after the Big 12 took the money that was left. So even the Swaim Show agrees that recruiting is going to take a big hit and might be actually taking a big hit right now because recruits are very concerned about the lack of exposure they would get in the Pac-12. That brings me back to the transfer portal comment from Rick Sopp, and I do think it would affect the Pac-12 negatively when it comes to the transfer portal. These players would want to transfer out of these schools because of the lack of exposure. I mean, Washington was able to land Michael Penix Jr. from Indiana, an amazing quarterback, and has turned Washington around. Well, in the future, if Washington signs this deal, you can say bye-bye to those Michael Penix Jr.'s in the future because they're not going to transfer to Washington because of the lack of exposure. So yes, I do think the Pac-12 will take a hit in recruiting, and they will also take a hit when it comes to the transfer portal. Comment in the comment section. Number one, do you agree with me that the Pac-12 will take big hits on recruiting and in the transfer portal if these teams do in fact decide to sign this media rights deal because of the lack of exposure? Number two, do you think that it's actually possible that ESPN is trying to encourage these Pac-12 teams to jump from the Pac-12 to the Big 12? Because remember, they already have a TV deal with the Big 12, so if these teams jump to the Big 12, they would actually have more content for that after dark slot, more choices. Number three, if this media deal turns into 95% streaming or exclusively streaming, that there's no way the Pac-12 can get these teams to sign the grant of rights, especially any type of grant of rights this past 3 years. That's all I got for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next show.